Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Saturday, January the 10th, and welcome to our commentary. Well, it's been a pretty crazy week. A week ago, we were watching on television all the events regarding Maduro being arrested in Caracas and being flown to New York, all those images. And we end the week in Minneapolis, where, have this terrible shooting and this terrible situation up there, which I think confirms just how crazily divided the country is. So, look, all I can tell you about Maduro is this: I support the fact that he was removed. I think it's extremely important that we rebuild the Venezuelan oil industry. That's the key to making Venezuela successful again. And I think it's extremely important that as soon as possible, we put in charge of Venezuela a local person, a local name. My choice would be the man who won the election, president or candidate, González Urrutia, who was the man who won the election and by all accounts is accepted by most countries as the president of Venezuela. We should put him in there, have him serve out the term, and then have elections later on whenever that happens. But that would be my choice. That would be, it doesn't have to be right away. It doesn't have to be next week. Maybe there's a transition. But I think by the middle of the year, I like to see that happen. 6 months, let's say. I like to see that happen so that they have their own leader, somebody from their country running the show, and we can continue working with the oil sector. I'm pretty sure that González Urrutia would be the one who would work very closely with the United States because he knows how important rebuilding the oil industry is for Venezuela. So I'm sure he would work very closely and he would be very supportive of whatever we do with the oil industry. Well, the week, of course, went on. In the middle of the week, we had that terrible shooting incident up in Minneapolis, and I have a post about this over at the American Thinker today, where I show you just how divided the country is, or at least I point out. You've got people calling this lady a terrorist. I don't think she's a terrorist. I think she's a very misguided person who got some very bad advice about interrupting or blocking agents from doing their job and got herself in the middle of something because of a very bad decision she made to get involved in the middle of ICE doing their job. And then, of course, you have the police officer who I think acted as reasonably as anybody else would have acted. If you see a car coming at you, I don't think it's unfair to conclude that you might get killed. So he shot. Unfortunately, he killed her. Her car hit him. There's a video clearly confirming that. Thankfully, it didn't kill him, but unfortunately, his bullets did kill her. So she has now become a sort of a martyr, if you will. And you've got people talking about ICE in terms that are completely ridiculous, like ICE is Gestapo and ICE killed her and this kind of thing, which is totally untrue. That kind of language doesn't help anything, but it just shows you how divided the country is. But as I mentioned in my video yesterday, and as I wrote in my post today at American Thinker, the real culprit here, the real problem here, is the political class in Minneapolis who doesn't work with ICE. If they were working with ICE and sharing information with ICE, like most cities do, in Texas we do that, in Florida they do that, in most cities they do that. If you work with ICE and you share the information with ICE, and they can help you, you can help each other identify some of these people, then you wouldn't have to have ICE going into neighborhoods or into shopping centers looking for people, because the local authorities would help you find them. And that's what's really missing here. You have these so-called sanctuary cities, which are nothing more than a total defiance of federal law, and they're not supposed to do that. So I would like to see, frankly, the Department of Justice come down very hard on some of these cities and say, okay, you want to play sanctuary city? Here's the penalty. And I wouldn't even object if you arrested the mayor of one of these cities for defying federal law. I mean, that's what he's doing. He's defying federal law. You're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to cooperate with the federal authorities. So I'm sorry, but I think more of this is going to happen. And again, I put the blame right on the feet of the political class who thinks that they don't have to work with ICE or that they don't have to respect federal law. They don't have that option at the state level or at the local level. If the mayor of Minneapolis or any other city wants to object to what President Trump is doing, what they need to do is they need to do a lawsuit, go to the Supreme Court and say, they shouldn't send ICE in here, and make this case go to the Supreme Court. Now, they're not going to win because the Supreme Court is going to support President Trump because President Trump is enforcing immigration laws. But still, that's the best option they have. Go to the courts. But to sit there and encourage people to violate federal law or encourage people to get in the way of activities, ICE activities, or other enforcement activities, that is a big mistake. And that's how you get incidents like the one we just got in Minneapolis. So it is really on the feet of the political class when these things happen, because they're the ones who are not obeying. They're the ones who are encouraging people to break federal law. And that should not be tolerated under any circumstances. Just think about this. I was debating this with a Democrat friend the other day, and I asked that friend, okay, what if every city in the United States decides what federal law they're going to respect? What kind of chaotic situation would we have in the country if, let's say, a city in, I don't know, Texas or whatever said, we're not going to enforce federal taxation anymore. We're not going to force companies to work with the IRS anymore. If you have an address in our community, you don't have to work with the IRS. Imagine what chaos would that be? Well, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about violating federal law. And that's not an option that we have in a country run by a federal constitution. So I put the blame here on the feet of the political class in cities like Minneapolis, Chicago, and LA, where they've decided that they don't have to play by the rules, that they've got their own rules that they can play with. And that's not doable. That's simply not doable. Well, let's talk a little bit about a post. I have a post coming out Sunday morning where I talk about Mexico. President Trump has been pretty vocal here recently about Mexico, saying that Mexico is run by cartels, making some pretty harsh statements about Mexico. Obviously, the Mexicans don't like that, and I understand why. They don't like it. But Mexico should work with President Trump. Now, I don't think President Trump is going to send troops into Mexico, nor would I support that. I think that would be awfully risky to do. You would have all kinds of unintended consequences if you put American troops in Mexico. But I do think that the Mexicans should sit down with President Trump and say, okay, how can we work together? How can we help you? Because all this violence and all this chaos that the cartels are creating in Mexico is hurting Mexico. It's hurting business. It's hurting the national safety of the country. It's hurting the lives of people, lots of Mexicans who get caught up in all this shooting. So I think that, you hear more and more from Mexicans that they want the government to do something, but the government keeps refusing to do anything about it. So I would encourage the president of Mexico to sit down with President Trump and say, how can we work together? How can we fix this thing? And I think if she did that, not only would that be welcomed by most Mexicans, it would be good for Mexico. And that's what this is all about. Well, we go back on this day in history, 1982, the catch, what they call the catch. And that was that great game between the Dallas Cowboys and San Francisco 49ers, where Joe Montana at the last second threw a pass in the end zone, and Dwight Clark made this incredible jumping catch. They scored a touchdown. They went to the Super Bowl, eliminated the Cowboys that year. The 49ers went on to win 4 Super Bowls in that great run that they had. But this was the beginning of that run. And that was not the end of Tom Landry and the Cowboys. They came back the next year, but did not go beyond the title game again in 1983. But it was a great game to watch. I happened to be watching it on TV. It was a pretty amazing finish. And the catch, as they like to call it, was 44 years ago today. So if you remember that, if you remember watching it on TV, then you are getting old, just like I'm getting old. By the way, speaking of football, they've got some great games this weekend, and they've got one in Chicago Saturday night between the Packers and the Bears. They'll be playing in Soldier Field, and they're expecting snow. So, look, I've always loved watching a football game in the snow. I remember when we first came to the United States, my brother and I would go outside up in Wisconsin where we lived, and we would throw the football around and tackle each other in the snow. It was the greatest thing in the world to play football in the snow. And it's a lot of fun to watch it as well. So tonight, maybe we'll get some good old-fashioned football on the snow at Soldier Field in Chicago between the legendary Packers and the legendary Bears. It should be a good game. And if it snows, it'll even be a better game. I hope it snows. I hope it really snows very hard. It's so much fun to watch a game in the snow, to watch football while it's snowing out there. Thank you for watching. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you the next time. Bye-bye, everybody.